I ultimately made my neighbor pay a stunning price by systematically destroying his prized botanical garden level backyard. And he couldn't do a single thing about it. The best part? It all started with a seemingly insignificant discrepancy on my utility bill. Some years ago, I was working a fly-in, fly-out job at a mine. This meant I'd leave my small town, fly to the mine for a 2-week stretch, then fly back home for a 1-week break. It was a cycle of rinse and repeat. As a dual-trade electrician and instrumentation tech, the hours were long. But the pay, the beer tickets, as we called them, was incredible. With all this cash piling up, I decided to invest in a fixer-upper house I could work on during my weeks off, with the idea of selling it later. My mates in the construction industry would sometimes lend a hand in exchange for beer and a barbecue. It's just the way things are done. The house itself was an old, single-story wooden place with 4 bedrooms and 1.5 baths, all sitting on a half-acre lot. And it came with the Holy Grail, a massive 4-bay shed with its own power and water. It even came with a John Deere ride-on mower for the endless green stuff. The property came up at an estate sale. The previous owners had lived there for over 25 years. It needed the standard fare, fresh paint, some repairs, and a lot of modernization, but it was a solid structure in a well-established neighborhood where all the lots were a generous half-acre. I hadn't even been there for an hour on my first day of moving in when I got my first visit from a neighbor. Now, there are 2 kinds of neighbors who show up that quickly, the ones who bring a welcome casserole, and the other kind. I got the other kind. Let's call them Arthur and Eleanor. Arthur was a retired barrister, and Eleanor was a retired surgeon. For those who don't know, a barrister is a specialist lawyer who wears one of those ridiculous wigs in court, a step above a regular solicitor. They don't come cheap. I once had to call one for a 30-minute consultation about a court case, and it cost me $500. Those wigs are serious business. Anyway, Arthur and Eleanor came over with that classic hello, peasant. This is a quiet neighborhood spiel. They made sure to mention they'd been living there for over 20 years. I was polite and respectful, explaining my FIFO work schedule meant I'd be in and out, that I wasn't a partier, and that the only noise would be from me fixing up the house. Well, Arthur and Eleanor were most assuredly not impressed. I don't know if it was the contractor part or the fixing up the house part that did it, but their faces soured as if I'd just leaned in and licked them. Arthur made his first critical mistake right then, completely unaware that his arrogance was setting the stage for his own downfall. I received a full legal brief on local noise laws and was repeatedly reminded that this was a quiet neighborhood. Arthur also kindly informed me that everyone around here has pride in their gardens, and it would be a shame if I were any different. Right. Message received. Arthur has no chill. I just let him wander off with his alpha attitude and got back to moving in, just as the sun was setting. My other neighbors, let's call them Mark and Chloe, came over with their teenage kids, bringing beers and pizza. Mark was a high school principal, and Chloe was a nurse, total opposites of the first pair. They immediately asked how my meeting with Arthur and Eleanor went, and we all had a good laugh about it. Mark told me how Arthur frequently came over to give him unsolicited gardening advice. Mark, Chloe, and their kids were good people. Throughout that first day, I'd seen Arthur pottering around his garden, though garden doesn't do it justice. His entire half-acre aside from the house, was a manicured paradise. Like a private botanical garden complete with a gazebo, pool, and pond. Mark mentioned that Arthur loved to brag about his rare trees and exotic flowers. You can probably tell I'm not a gardening enthusiast. In my book, grass is just something you get rid of to lay down concrete. A few months passed in this rhythm of work and home life. I'd come home, catch up on sleep, and chip away at the house. I'd even serviced the mower in my big shed and kept the lawn trimmed. All under the not-so-subtle watch of Arthur next door. When I finally received my first proper quarterly utility bill, I could continue a little habit of mine. As soon as I moved in, I'd recorded the initial power and water meter readings in my utilities diary. It's a great way to track usage and spot any issues like leaks or electrical faults. The issue truly began to unfold around month 5. When I decided to replace the old electrical switchboards in both the house and the shed. To do this safely, I had to kill the power to the entire property at the main switch in the meter box. While the power was off, I also planned to do a full test of all the electrical wiring and outlets. It's required by law before a sale. But I hadn't done the test myself, so I wanted to be sure. During the testing, 2 things struck me as odd. First, the cable running to the shed tested not as expected. It was behaving as if something was still connected and drawing power, even though I had unplugged everything in the shed. Second, I saw Arthur outside, watering some of his flower beds by hand with a hose. This was strange because Arthur's entire property, just like mine, had a fully automatic irrigation system. Several times a week, like clockwork, his pump and timers would water the whole estate. Misters for the flower beds, drippers for the potted plants, and those classic pop-up sprinklers for the lawn that go chuck, 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 brrrr. I had never seen him water by hand before. The odd test result on the shed circuit pointed to either a fault in the underground cable or a hidden connection. My money was now on the latter. The next day, I borrowed a cable locator from a mate and started tracing the underground power line to the shed, marking its path with my favorite pink spray paint. The cable ran about a meter inside my fence line, straight from the meter box at the front of the property. But halfway between the house and the shed, the locator revealed something more. It appeared there was a branch, an illegal tap, splitting off from my shed's power cable and heading straight into Arthur's property. Looking over the fence, I could see that the line pointed directly at a small hut on his property that housed his pool pump, filter, and all the controls for his irrigation system. Just to be thorough, I used the locator to trace my water pipe as well. Sure enough, it also branched off at the exact same spot. The pieces were falling into place. A plan began to form in my mind. I had my conveyancer, what I call my people, look into the public records for when Arthur's pool and my shed had been built. Then, I went out and bought a set of security cameras and a recorder. For the rest of that week off, I laid the groundwork. I hammered surveyor's pegs into the ground to mark out the boundaries for a big, beautiful deck I was planning to build, creating a plausible reason for all the spray paint marking the service's trench. I installed the cameras, one aimed down the side of my house to capture the power and water meters, and another pointed at my shed, which just so happened to also capture a perfect view of Arthur's pool hut. Totally legal. I also installed a mini power meter on the shed circuit itself. so I could isolate and monitor its specific usage. Finally, I set my own irrigation timers to match Arthur's schedule. Just in case. The very last thing I did before flying back to the mine was to switch off the circuit breaker for the shed and turn off the main water valve to my property. I recorded the meter readings in my diary and left. My lawn might suffer for 2 weeks. But sometimes you have to make a sacrifice. When I returned 2 weeks later, the first thing I did was stroll over to the meter box. And what do you know? The brand new mini meter for the shed, which I had left powered off, now had numbers on it. The main water valve, which I had closed, was now open. And the meter reading was higher. So, that's how bold Arthur was. He wasn't even trying to hide it. I checked the camera footage. It was all there. I saw Arthur at his pool hut the day after I left, looking puzzled when his irrigation system failed to start. I saw him walk off frame, only to appear on the other camera, peering at my meters. And then, clear as day, I saw him flip my breaker back on and turn the water valve open. The final clip showed him walking back to his property and his sprinklers magically turning on. While I was away, my conveyancer had called. The records confirmed it. Arthur's pool and my shed were built around the same time. 10 years ago. This meant Arthur, the retired wig-wearing barrister, had likely been stealing power and water for a decade. And he certainly had no problem stealing it from me. I decided to dig the hole a little deeper for him. One day, while he was out in his garden, I called over the fence and casually asked if he'd seen anyone messing with my meters. He walked over, stood exactly where the camera could see him, and said no. Before I left for the mine again, I not only turned everything off and recorded the readings, but I also attached official looking out of service tags to the shed circuit breaker and the water valve, complete with the date, and took photos. This revealed Arthur's greatest fatal flaw, his utter conviction that his social standing and legal background made him untouchable. A belief that would ultimately cost him dearly. When I returned, the tags were gone, and the power and water were on again. I repeated the dance, calling him over to the fence. Again. He denied knowing anything. 2 chances to come clean. Okay, Arthur. Time for phase 3. Let's be clear about what had been happening since I moved in. Arthur or Eleanor would complain about power tool noise during the day, even though I never started before 9 a.m. or worked past 5 p.m. And our houses were 300 feet apart. They called the police with noise complaints when I had mates over for a barbecue, even though the radio was low and my other neighbors, Mark and Chloe, were there with us. While I was away at the mine, Arthur had one of my frangipani trees cut down because its flowers were falling too close to his fence. He could have just asked. And the final straw, he tried to use his legal background to bully the local council into denying the plans for my big, beautiful deck, plans that had already been approved. He tried to fuck with my deck. The time for talk was over. I visited a couple of mates to borrow some equipment. In my shed, I took a 53-gallon drum, filled it with water, and poured in a 44-pound bag of pool salt, pure NaCl. It took a long time to stir and dissolve it all. I set up a chemical dosing pump, connected it to the drum, and ran a power lead over to my own irrigation system's timer. At 2 a.m., Feeling like Jason Bourne with my headlamp on, I snuck out. I turned off my main water supply, ran the taps in the house to release the pressure, and carefully dug a hole right over the illegal branch in the water line. I exposed the pipe going to Arthur's place and attached a tapping saddle. This device allowed me to connect a small, clear plastic tube directly into his water supply, the supply that was coming off my water pipe. I carefully filled the hole back in, ran the tubing along the fence line to my shed, and connected it to the dosing pump. The delivery system was armed. I gave him one last chance. Around midday, I knocked on his door. Eleanor answered. I asked to speak with them both about their pool and irrigation power supply. For a split second, I saw it in her eyes. She knew. She paused, then said they had nothing to talk about and closed the door. As it shut, I said, if Arthur wants to come see me, I'll be home at 5 p.m. that evening. Right on schedule. Arthur's irrigation system turned on. And so did my dosing pump. Have you ever heard the term salting the earth? The pump siphoned the entire 53-gallon drum of concentrated salt water and injected it directly into Arthur's intricate irrigation network. Every mister, dripper, and sprinkler delivered a dose of poison to his prized, rare plants. Some have commented online, saying I assaulted the backyard. And they're not wrong. By the time his system turned off, the drum was empty. In the dead of night, I Jason Bourned my way back out, removed the tubing, sealed the tapping saddle, and packed up my gear. By 8 a.m. the next morning, I was loudly and visibly digging a massive trench along the entire services line from the meter box to the shed. As I worked, I could already see it. Everything in his garden was wilting. The salt had been at work for 13 hours. When I reached the illegal branch, I called Arthur and Eleanor over to show them what I found. They denied everything. I just smiled and told them it was no problem. I was replacing the whole line to the shed anyway, so I'd just cut off the bit going to their place. I then jumped the fence and physically ripped the pipe and cable out of the ground on their side. The fallout was spectacular. Once Arthur realized what had happened, he and Eleanor confronted me, furious. But when he threatened legal action, I calmly told him about my utilities diary, the dated out-of-service tags, the public records of his pool construction, and, of course, the video footage of him trespassing and tampering with my utilities. He knew I did it. And the fact he couldn't prove it or do anything about it drove him absolutely insane. I never had another problem with him. His garden turned a sickly yellow-brown, and it took him months to salvage what little he could. He told the local horticultural society, of which he was president, that his pool water had somehow contaminated the irrigation system. People have asked why I didn't just take him to court, since I had such a clear case. The truth is, a legal battle against a retired barrister would have been a long, expensive headache. This was more direct. It was a personal response to a personal attack. I sold the house a year later, as planned, after building the most magnificent deck you've ever seen. It ran along the entire back of the house, 5 meters wide, fully roofed, with a built-in barbecue station. I still miss that deck. In the end, the story serves as a powerful lesson. be careful who you provoke. You never know what skills they have. And when you push them too far, the consequences can be swift, severe, and perfectly tailored to your greatest vulnerabilities. So, what do you think? Was this the perfect, proportionate revenge? Or should I have involved the authorities and trusted the legal system? Let me know your thoughts below.